Rain fell in cold sheets across the dirt streets of Red Cloud, Nebraska, transforming the main thoroughfare into a river of mud that sucked at wagon wheels and boots alike. Helena Foster stood at the corner near the mercantile with a wooden crate of wildflowers she had gathered from the hillsides that morning, their petals already drooping from the relentless downpour that showed no signs of stopping. Most sensible folks had retreated indoors hours ago, but Helena needed every cent she could scrape together, and flowers were one of the few things she could sell without needing money to start. Her late husband Jacob had been dead 3 years now, taken by pneumonia one bitter winter, and the small plot of land they had owned was long gone to pay his medical bills and the debts he had hidden from her. At 24 years old, she felt ancient, worn down by grief and struggle, her hands raw from washing laundry and her back perpetually aching from the work she took, wherever she could find it. The flowers were a gamble, something beautiful in a world that often felt starved of beauty. She had wrapped the stems in damp cloth and arranged them as prettily as she could manage, bundles of purple lupine and golden black-eyed Susans, delicate wild roses and bright red Indian paintbrush. In good weather, she might sell a few bunches to ladies heading to church or men trying to court sweethearts, but in this deluge, she had not sold a single stem. Water dripped from the brim of her bonnet and ran down her threadbare shawl, soaking through to her dress beneath. Her teeth chattered, but she held her ground. Giving up meant going back to the tiny room she rented above the saloon with nothing to show for her effort, and she needed at least enough to pay for her lodging this week. A horse and rider appeared through the curtain of rain, moving slowly down the street. The horse was a magnificent bay gelding, well fed and groomed despite the weather, and the man in the saddle sat tall and straight despite the storm. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that channeled water away from his shoulders, and a long oilskin coat that marked him as someone with means. Helena straightened instinctively, holding up a bunch of the lupine even though she knew it was foolish to expect a cattleman to care about flowers. But the rider turned his head toward her, and to her surprise, he guided his horse directly to where she stood. The man who looked down at her had a face weathered by sun and wind, strong features that might have been carved from the same stone as the bluffs outside town. His eyes were a startling gray blue, the color of the sky just before a storm broke, and they studied her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of how bedraggled she must look. He appeared to be somewhere in his early 30s, with the kind of solid presence that came from years of hard work and harder decisions. How much for all of them? His voice was deep and carried easily over the drumming rain. Helena blinked water from her eyes, certain she had misheard. "I am sorry, sir, the flowers, all of them. How much?" She looked down at her crate, quickly calculating. She had perhaps 30 bunches, and she usually charged 15 cents apiece when she could sell them at all. $4.50 for the lot, she said, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. It was more money than she typically made in a week. The rancher reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet, extracting a $5 gold piece that gleamed even in the gray light. He held it out to her. "Keep the change, and I have a proposition for you." Helena took the coin with trembling fingers, unable to quite believe her fortune. "A proposition, sir. I am Duncan Hayes. I own the Triple H Ranch about 5 miles west of town. I have guests coming in 2 weeks, important business associates from back east, and my house looks about as welcoming as a barn. I need someone who understands how to make a place look civilized. If you can make flowers look this good in a rainstorm, I figure you might be able to help me. Come sell them at my ranch. Fresh flowers twice a week, and help getting the place presentable. I will pay you $20 a month, plus room and board if you want it. $20 a month was more than Helena made in 3 months of taking in laundry and selling flowers. Room and board meant she would not have to worry about rent or food. It seemed too good to be true, which immediately made her suspicious. She had learned the hard way that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. But when she looked up at Duncan Hayes, she saw no deception in his face, only a kind of awkward earnestness that suggested he was as uncomfortable making the offer as she was hearing it. "That is very generous, Mr. Hayes, but I do not know anything about housekeeping on that scale. I am just a widow who sells flowers. And I am just a rancher who knows cattle and horses, not how to impress city folks who think the West is all savages and outlaws. I need help and you need work. Seems like we could help each other." The rain chose that moment to intensify, and Helena shivered violently. Duncan frowned and swung down from his horse in one fluid motion. Up close, he was even more imposing, easily 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and the kind of strength that came from years of physical labor. But his touch was gentle as he shrugged out of his oilskin coat and draped it over her shoulders. The coat was warm from his body heat and smelled of leather and sage. "You are going to catch your death out here," he said quietly. "At least come with me to the hotel and have some hot coffee while you think about it. If you decide no, I will bring you back here or wherever else you want to go." Helena knew she should refuse, should maintain the proper distance between a widow and a strange man, but she was so cold and so tired, and the thought of hot coffee was almost as tempting as the job offer. She nodded, and Duncan gathered up her crate of flowers as easily as if it weighed nothing. He helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her, his arms solid around her waist to keep her steady. The heat of him at her back was startling, and she found herself leaning into it without meaning to. The Red Cloud Hotel was the finest building in town, 3 stories of painted wood with real glass windows and a dining room that served food on china plates. Helena had never been inside, had only peered through the windows at the well-dressed guests. Duncan guided his horse to the hitching post and helped her down, then carried her flowers inside as if it were perfectly normal for a cattleman to walk into the hotel lobby with an armload of wildflowers. The clerk behind the desk looked startled but recovered quickly. "Mr. Hayes, good to see you, sir. Your usual room." "Just the dining room today, Tom. Coffee for 2 and whatever soup Mrs. Chen has on." The dining room was warm and bright, with a fire crackling in the fieldstone fireplace. Duncan set the flowers on an empty table and pulled out a chair for Helena, waiting until she sat before taking his own seat. A Chinese woman in a neat dress brought coffee and bowls of rich beef stew with fresh bread, and Helena had to stop herself from falling on the food like a starving animal. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. Duncan seemed to sense her hunger and busied himself with his own meal, giving her space to eat without feeling watched. The stew was the best thing Helena had tasted in months, thick with tender meat and vegetables, and the coffee chased the chill from her bones. When she finally looked up, she found Duncan watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You did not have to do this. You looked half frozen. I would do the same for anyone." He paused, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "About my offer. I know it probably sounds strange, a rancher asking a widow to come work at his ranch. I want you to know it is a legitimate offer. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Garcia, who has been with me for 10 years. She is getting on in years and could use help with the heavy work. And I have a foreman, Charlie Donovan, and 4 other hands who all bunk in the main house during winter. It is not like you would be alone with me, if that is what worries you." Helena felt her cheeks warm. That had indeed been part of her concern, though she was ashamed to admit it. "I was not suggesting anything improper, Mr. Hayes. Duncan, please, and I did not think you were. But I have sisters back in Ohio, and I know how folks talk. I just want you to know that your reputation would be safe. Mrs. Garcia is a proper chaperone, and she is as fierce as any guard dog when it comes to propriety." Despite herself, Helena felt a smile tug at her lips. "You make her sound formidable." "She is. She once chased off a peddler with a frying pan because he tried to shortchange her on sugar." Duncan's own mouth quirked in a small smile, and the expression transformed his stern face into something warmer. "But she makes the best tortillas you have ever tasted, and she has been after me for years to fix up the house properly. She will be pleased to have help." Helena considered the offer as she finished her coffee. $20 a month was security she had not known since Jacob died. Room and board meant she would not have to worry about where her next meal was coming from, or whether she would have a roof over her head. And the work itself sounded pleasant, arranging flowers and helping with a house, rather than the back-breaking labor of laundry or the humiliation of begging for odd jobs. But there was risk, too. She knew nothing about Duncan Hayes except that he seemed kind and was willing to spend money to help a stranger. That alone made her suspicious. In her experience, men did not do things without expecting something in return. "Why me?" she asked finally. There must be other women in town who could do this work. Women with better credentials than a widow who sells flowers in the rain. Duncan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Because when I rode past, you were still standing there in the rain, trying your damnedest to make something beautiful in the middle of a storm. That takes grit. And because those flowers you picked were arranged with care, even though you were probably cold and tired. That shows pride in your work. Those are the qualities I need. I can teach someone to dust furniture, but I cannot teach someone to care." The simple honesty in his words struck something deep in Helena's chest. She had spent 3 years feeling invisible, just another struggling widow in a town full of hard-luck stories. To be seen, to have her effort recognized, meant more than she could easily express. She thought about her room above the saloon, where the noise kept her awake most nights, and the walls were so thin she could hear every conversation in the rooms next door. She thought about the endless cycle of washing and mending, her hands always red and rough, her back always aching, and she thought about what it might be like to have security, even for a little while. "I will try it," she said, meeting his eyes. "For 1 month. If it does not work out for either of us, I can come back to town." Duncan extended his hand across the table. "That is fair. We will try it for a month." His hand was large and calloused, warm and solid around hers. Helena felt a strange flutter in her chest at the contact, something she had not felt in a very long time. She pulled her hand back quickly, telling herself it was just gratitude, nothing more. She was a widow in mourning, and he was offering her employment, nothing else. "When would you want me to start?" she asked, focusing on practicalities. "As soon as you can. Today, if you are willing. The rain is not letting up, and I have a covered wagon back at the livery. We can collect whatever belongings you have and head out to the ranch." Helena thought of her few possessions, everything she owned in the world fitting into a single battered trunk. "I do not have much to collect. I rent a room above the saloon." Something flickered in Duncan's eyes, gone too quickly for her to identify. "Then let us settle your account there and get your things. No point in paying for a room you are not using." Within an hour, Helena found herself sitting on the bench of a sturdy wagon, her trunk and crate of flowers secured in the back, as Duncan guided the horses west out of Red Cloud. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle, And the oilskin coat, he insisted, she keep wearing protected her from the worst of it. The landscape rolled away in gentle swells of grassland, broken by occasional stands of cottonwoods and willows marking the path of creeks. In the distance, bluffs rose like ancient sentinels, their tops lost in low, hanging clouds. Duncan drove in comfortable silence, and Helena found herself stealing glances at him. He had strong, capable hands on the reins, and he handled the horses with the easy confidence of someone who had been doing it all his life. His profile was stern, almost harsh, but she had seen the kindness in his eyes and heard the gentleness in his voice. He was a puzzle, this rancher who bought all her flowers in a rainstorm and offered her a job on the strength of her determination. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked, wanting to break the silence. "About 8 years. I came out from Ohio in '63, worked as a hand for various outfits, saved my money, and filed a homestead claim. Built it up from nothing, just 160 acres and a lot of hope. Now I've got nearly 2,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, and enough horses to run a decent operation. It has been hard work, but good work. You must be proud of what you have built." "I am, though there is always more to do. The cattle business is changing. Used to be you could just let your stock range free and round them up when you needed them. Now, with all the homesteaders coming in, fencing off land, we have to be more organized. These fellows coming from back east, they are talking about better breeding stock, improved bloodlines. That is why I need the house looking good. I want them to see that I am not just some rough cowboy. I am running a real business here." Helena heard the determination in his voice and understood it. She had felt the same way when Jacob was alive, wanting people to see that they were building something, that they mattered. "I will do my best to help. I know you will." The Triple H Ranch appeared gradually, first the windmill rising above the grassland, then the roof lines of buildings, and finally the full sweep of the property. The main house was larger than Helena had expected, a 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. The barn was massive, built of stone and timber, with a hayloft visible through the open doors. There were several other outbuildings, bunkhouses and sheds, corrals with good fencing, and everywhere the signs of careful maintenance and pride in ownership. Even in the rain, the ranch had a solid, prosperous look that spoke of Duncan's success. A woman appeared on the porch as the wagon pulled up, a small, sturdy figure in a dark dress and white apron. She had iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a face that looked like it had been carved from walnut, deeply lined but strong. This had to be Mrs. Garcia, and Helena felt a flutter of nervousness at meeting the formidable housekeeper Duncan had described. Duncan helped Helena down from the wagon and retrieved her trunk. "Mrs. Garcia, this is Helena Foster. She's going to be helping us get ready for the guests and keeping the house supplied with flowers. Helena, this is Luisa Garcia, who runs this household with an iron fist." Mrs. Garcia looked Helena up and down with shrewd, dark eyes that seemed to see everything. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled and her whole face transformed. "About time you brought some help, Duncan, and someone young and pretty too. Come inside, child. You look half drowned. I have hot water for tea and fresh bread just out of the oven." The inside of the house was spacious but plainly furnished, exactly as Duncan had said. The front door opened into a large parlor with a stone fireplace, comfortable but battered furniture, and walls that were bare except for a few faded paintings. Beyond that, Helena could see a dining room with a long table and a kitchen where wonderful smells were emanating. A staircase led to the second floor, and Mrs. Garcia guided Helena up it to a bedroom that was small but clean, with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the grassland. "This will be your room," Mrs. Garcia said, setting down the trunk Duncan carried up. "It is not fancy, but the mattress is good and the roof does not leak. Dinner is at 6, breakfast at 5. Duncan runs a working ranch, so we keep early hours. The privy is out back, but we have chamber pots under the beds for nighttime. Sunday is your day off, though I appreciate help with the big meal. Any questions?" Helena shook her head, overwhelmed by how quickly her circumstances had changed. This morning she had been standing in the rain wondering if she would make enough to pay her rent. Now she had a clean room, the promise of regular meals, and work that did not leave her hands bloody. Mrs. Garcia's expression softened. "You look done in, child. Why do not you rest a bit before dinner? I will send up some hot water so you can wash." After the housekeeper left, Helena sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. Through the window, she could see Duncan crossing the yard toward the barn, his long stride purposeful. He stopped to speak with a man in a battered hat and oilskin coat, gesturing toward something Helena could not see. The ease between them spoke of long familiarity, and she guessed this was Charlie Donovan, the foreman Duncan had mentioned. A knock on the door announced a young man with a bucket of hot water, who introduced himself as Tommy and explained he was one of the ranch hands. He looked barely 20, with a sunburned face, and the kind of awkward friendliness of someone not used to being around women. After he left, Helena stripped off her wet clothes and washed with grateful thoroughness, scrubbing away the grime of town and the chill of the rain. She had one other dress in her trunk, only slightly less worn than the one she had been wearing, and she put it on feeling at least partially human again. Dinner that evening was an education in the workings of the ranch. The dining room table seated 10 easily, and 7 people gathered around it. Duncan sat at the head, with Mrs. Garcia to his right and Helena to his left. Charlie Donovan was there, a weathered man in his 40s with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that missed nothing. The other hands were Tommy, whom she had already met, along with Henry, Jack, and a quiet Mexican man named Esteban, who spoke little but ate with the focused intensity of someone who had worked hard all day. The food was abundant and delicious, platters of roast beef, potatoes, beans, and Mrs. Garcia's famous tortillas, along with fresh butter and honey. The men ate with good appetites but also with manners, passing dishes and keeping their conversation moderate. Helena had expected rougher behavior from ranch hands, but these men clearly respected Duncan and his household rules. "Helena is going to help us prepare for the visitors from Philadelphia," Duncan explained to the table. "She will be arranging flowers and helping Mrs. Garcia with the house. I want everyone to be on their best behavior when those gentlemen arrive. This is a big opportunity for the ranch." Charlie nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "We will make sure everything is in good order, boss. The fences are all tight, and we have been working on that new barn. Should be finished well before they get here. Good. I want them to see a first-rate operation. They are used to the big spreads back east, farms that have been in families for generations. They need to see that we can compete with that, even out here on the frontier." Talk turned to the practical matters of running the ranch, discussing cattle that needed to be moved to fresh pasture, a section of fence that needed repair, the possibility of buying more breeding stock at the next cattle auction in Omaha. Helena listened quietly, absorbing this new world. She knew nothing about ranching, but she could hear the pride and determination in Duncan's voice when he talked about his plans, the respect the hands showed him, the sense of shared purpose. After dinner, while Mrs. Garcia directed the clearing of dishes, Duncan asked Helena to join him in the parlor. The room was warmer now with a fire burning in the fireplace, and the lamp light softened the harsh simplicity of the furnishings. Duncan gestured for her to sit in one of the chairs while he remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "I wanted to talk to you about what needs to be done," he said. "The guests are coming in 2 weeks, which does not give us much time. The house needs to feel welcoming, civilized. I need curtains for the windows, something to make the walls less bare, flowers in the main rooms. The guest bedrooms upstairs need to be properly furnished. I have the money to buy what is needed, but I need someone with an eye for these things to make the decisions." Helena felt panic rising. "Duncan, I am not sure I am the right person for this. I have never decorated a house like this. Jacob and I lived in a soddy for most of our marriage. But you know what looks nice. You proved that with your flowers, and Mrs. Garcia can help with the practical matters. I just need someone who cares enough to make it right." He finally sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I will be honest with you, Helena. I am nervous about these men coming. They represent big money, connections back east that could make or break the ranch. If they like what they see, they might invest in better breeding stock, help me expand. If they think I am just some rough frontiersman who does not know which fork to use, they will take their money elsewhere." The vulnerability in his admission surprised her. This strong, capable man who had built a ranch from nothing was worried about impressing city gentlemen. Helena understood that kind of fear, the terror that all your hard work could be dismissed because you did not fit someone's expectations. "I will help you," she said quietly. "We will make the house so fine they will think they never left Philadelphia." Duncan's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Thank you. Tomorrow, after you have had a chance to rest, I will take you into town. You can buy whatever you need. Fabric for curtains, paintings or mirrors for the walls, linens for the guest rooms. Whatever you think will make the difference." That night, lying in the comfortable bed listening to the rain finally tapering off, Helena thought about the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been despairing, wondering how much longer she could keep going. Now she had a warm bed, good food, and work that felt meaningful. And she had Duncan Hayes, who had seen her standing in the rain and offered her a chance. She did not let herself think about the flutter she felt when he looked at her, or the warmth of his hand when he helped her down from the wagon. That way lay danger. She was a widow, and he was her employer. She could not afford to confuse gratitude with anything else. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The storm washed away to leave the world scrubbed clean. Helena woke to brilliant sunshine pouring through her window and the sound of activity in the yard below. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Garcia already at work in the kitchen, preparing what looked like enough food to feed an army. "Good morning, child. There is coffee on the stove and biscuits in the basket. Duncan said you two are going into town today, so eat up. It is a long ride." Helena poured coffee and took a biscuit, savoring the simple pleasure of food she had not had to beg or scrounge for. Through the kitchen window, she could see Duncan and Charlie talking by the barn, their heads close together in consultation. Duncan looked up as if feeling her gaze and raised a hand in greeting. She waved back, feeling that flutter again and telling herself firmly to stop it. The trip into Red Cloud was pleasant in the morning sunshine, the grassland stretching away in every direction like a green ocean. Duncan pointed out landmarks as they drove, explaining the geography of the region where water could be found, which trails led to neighboring ranches. Helena listened and watched, noticing things she had missed in the rain. The way Duncan's hands moved on the reins, competent and sure. The easy grace of his movements when he climbed down to adjust the harness. The kindness in his voice when he spoke about his neighbors, even those he disagreed with. In town, Duncan took her to the mercantile and told the proprietor to give her whatever she needed and put it on his account. Helena spent the morning in a daze of choosing, selecting fabric for curtains in deep burgundy and forest green, lace for the guest room windows, paintings of horses and prairie scenes for the walls, a beautiful mirror in a gilt frame for the parlor, sheets and blankets of good quality for the beds. She found china vases for flowers, candlesticks for the dining table, a cloth in rich blue for the sideboard. Duncan watched her work with an expression of growing satisfaction, occasionally suggesting something but mostly trusting her judgment. "You have a good eye," he said as she debated between two different lamps. "I knew you would." By the time they loaded the wagon, it was piled high with packages, and Helena's head was spinning with calculations. She had spent more of Duncan's money in one morning than she had earned in the last year, and the responsibility of it weighed on her. What if the Philadelphia gentleman did not like what she chose? What if she had wasted Duncan's money on things that were not right? Duncan seemed to sense her worry because he stopped the wagon just outside town and turned to face her. "Helena, whatever you are thinking, stop it. What you picked was perfect. I could see it in the way you considered each choice, the care you took. Those men are going to walk into my house and see that it is a civilized place run by someone with taste and refinement. That is what I needed, and you gave it to me. But what if? No what ifs. Trust yourself. I do." The simple confidence in his words steadied her, and Helena nodded, pushing down her doubts. They drove back to the ranch in comfortable silence, and she found herself noticing how much she enjoyed his company. Duncan did not chatter to fill silence, but when he did speak, it was worth listening to. He told her about building the ranch, the first terrible winter when he almost lost everything to a blizzard, the satisfaction of his first cattle sale that finally let him break even. He talked about Ohio, his family back there who thought he was crazy for coming west, and his determination to prove them wrong by succeeding. "You ever want to go back?" Helena asked. Duncan shook his head. "This is my home now. The West gets into your blood. All this space, the freedom to build something that is yours. Back in Ohio, everything was already decided. Every piece of land already owned, every opportunity already claimed. Here, if you are willing to work for it, you can make your own way." Helena understood that. She had loved the frontier for the same reason. Before Jacob's death had turned her dreams into a daily struggle for survival. Maybe, working at the Triple H, she could find some of that hope again. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Helena threw herself into transforming the house, and Mrs. Garcia proved to be an enthusiastic ally. Together they sewed curtains, hung paintings, polished furniture until it gleamed. Helena arranged fresh flowers in every room, changing them every few days so there was always something beautiful to look at. She discovered wildflower patches all over the ranch property and spent her mornings gathering blooms, her afternoons arranging them in the new vases. The work was hard but satisfying, and she went to bed each night physically tired but mentally content in a way she had not felt in years. Duncan watched the transformation with obvious pleasure, often stopping by to see what changes had been made. He started finding excuses to be in the house more, checking on things that did not really need checking, staying to talk while Helena worked on the curtains or arranged flowers. Their conversations ranged from practical matters to more personal subjects, and Helena found herself looking forward to these interludes, the chance to learn more about this man who had changed her life so dramatically. She learned that Duncan had been engaged once, back in Ohio, to a girl who decided she did not want to come west and married a shopkeeper instead. She learned that his favorite food was apple pie, that he could not carry a tune to save his life but loved to hear others sing, that he read poetry late at night when he thought no one would know. She learned that he worried constantly about the ranch, about making the right decisions, about living up to his own expectations. And slowly, without meaning to, she began to care for him in a way that went beyond gratitude. It terrified her. She had sworn after Jacob died that she would never let herself depend on a man again, never let herself be that vulnerable. But Duncan was different from Jacob, who had been charming and impractical, always chasing the next dream without thought for how they would survive. Duncan was steady, responsible, someone who thought before he acted and kept his promises. And the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not watching, made her heart race in a way she had thought was buried with her husband. One evening, a week before the Philadelphia gentlemen were due to arrive, Duncan asked Helena to join him on the porch after dinner. The sunset was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson and purple, and the prairie stretched away in endless beauty. They sat in the rocking chairs Mrs. Garcia had suggested Helena buy for the porch, and for a long while neither spoke, just watched the day fade into twilight. "I want to thank you," Duncan said finally, "for everything you have done. The house looks better than I could have imagined, and that is all you're doing. I had help. Mrs. Garcia did as much as I did. But it was your vision, your choices. You made my house into a home." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were very blue. "I want you to know that after the guests leave, after the month trial is up, I hope you will stay. Not just as someone I employ, but as part of this ranch. You fit here, Helena. You belong here." Helena's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I would like to stay. I have been happier these past 2 weeks than I have been in years." "Good. That is good." Duncan seemed to want to say more, but he fell silent and the moment passed. They sat together watching the stars come out, and Helena allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it would be like to sit here every evening, to make this ranch her home not just as an employee but as something more. The thought was dangerous and intoxicating, and she tucked it away in her heart like a secret. The Philadelphia gentlemen arrived on a warm Saturday afternoon, stepping down from a hired coach in their fine suits and polished shoes, looking around the ranch with the critical eyes of men used to evaluating investments. There were 3 of them. Mr. Harrison Pemberton, the eldest at perhaps 50, with silver hair and a commanding presence. His son William, closer to Duncan's age, with his father's sharp eyes but a friendlier manner. And their associate, Mr. James Crawford, a lean man with spectacles who immediately began making notes in a small leather book. Duncan greeted them with the kind of quiet confidence that Helena had come to admire, shaking hands and introducing his foreman and hands. He showed them to the guest rooms Helena had prepared, and she held her breath waiting for their reactions. But the men seemed genuinely pleased, complimenting the comfortable furnishings and the unexpected refinement of the accommodations. When they came down for dinner and saw the dining room with its fine tablecloth and flower centerpieces, its gleaming china and silver, Mr. Pemberton actually smiled. "Well, Hayes, I must say this is not what I expected. You have a lovely home." Duncan caught Helena's eye across the room and smiled, and she felt a surge of pride and something deeper, warmer. She had helped him with this, had made it possible for him to show these critical men that he was worthy of their respect. During dinner, she and Mrs. Garcia served the food they had spent all day preparing, and Helena found herself the subject of curious glances from the visitors. "Is this your wife, Hayes?" Mr. Crawford asked, and Helena felt her cheeks flame. "No, Helena is my housekeeper and the person responsible for making the house look so fine," Duncan said smoothly. She has an eye for beauty that I certainly lack." William Pemberton smiled at Helena. "Well, you have done a wonderful job. These flowers, are they all local wildflowers?" "Yes, sir. The prairie is full of them if you know where to look." "How charming. We should have thought to bring wildflower gardens east. They would be quite the fashion." Over the next 3 days, Helena watched Duncan work to impress his guests. He showed them the operation of the ranch, the quality of his cattle, the improvements he had made to the land. He discussed breeding programs and market trends with the kind of detailed knowledge that clearly surprised the Eastern men. In the evenings, they gathered in the parlor that Helena had made inviting with good lighting and comfortable furniture, and talked business while she and Mrs. Garcia served coffee and dessert. Helena could see that Duncan was winning them over, that they were beginning to see him not as some rough cowboy but as a serious businessman worthy of their investment. On the final evening of their visit, Mr. Pemberton made his decision. "Hayes, we are impressed with what you have built here. Your operation is sound. Your plans are well thought out, and I believe you have the potential to become one of the premier cattle operations in Nebraska. We would like to invest $50,000 in the Triple H Ranch, in exchange for a 20% stake in the operation and a seat on an advisory board. Does that interest you?" Helena, standing by the door ready to clear the coffee cups, saw Duncan's face light up with joy quickly suppressed into businesslike calm. "That interests me very much, Mr. Pemberton. I believe we can work out terms that benefit both parties." "Excellent. Crawford, draw up the preliminary agreement. We will have our lawyers finalize the details, but I want to shake on it now, Hayes. You are a man of vision, and I respect that." The two men shook hands, and Helena slipped out of the room before her own smile could betray her emotion. She found Mrs. Garcia in the kitchen and hugged the older woman impulsively. "They are investing in the ranch, $50,000. Mrs. Garcia laughed and hugged her back. "Of course they are. Anyone with eyes could see that Duncan runs a good operation, and you helped him show it properly. You should be proud, child." After the guests retired for the night, Duncan found Helena on the porch where she had gone to look at the stars. He was smiling more broadly than she had ever seen, and when he saw her, he picked her up and spun her around in an exuberant circle. "We did it. Helena, we did it. That money will let me buy better breeding stock, improve the buildings, maybe even buy the adjoining property. This is everything I have been working toward." Helena laughed, dizzy from the spinning and from his joy. When he set her down, his hands lingered on her waist, and suddenly the air between them felt charged. Duncan's smile faded into something more serious, more intense. "I could not have done this without you. You made them see that I am not just some frontier rancher playing at business. You made them respect me. You did that yourself. I just made the house pretty. You did so much more than that." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin with heartbreaking gentleness. "Helena, these past few weeks, getting to know you, watching you work, talking with you in the evenings, I have felt something I have not felt in a long time. Something I thought maybe I would never feel. I know it is too soon. I know you are still in mourning and I am your employer and there are 100 reasons why I should not say this, but I cannot help it. I care for you. More than I should, more than is probably wise, but I cannot seem to stop." Helena's breath caught. She should step back, should maintain proper distance, should protect herself from the risk of caring again. But she was tired of being alone, tired of being afraid. And when she looked into Duncan's eyes, she saw everything she had secretly hoped for reflected back at her. "I care for you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it is just gratitude, but it is more than that. You make me feel safe. You make me feel seen. I did not think I would ever feel that way again." Duncan's smile was like dawn breaking. "Then I am going to court you properly, if you will let me. I will not rush you and I will not assume anything, but I want you to know my intentions. I want you in my life, Helena, not as my employee but as my partner. I want to build this ranch with you by my side. And when enough time has passed that it is proper, when you are ready, I want to marry you." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and hope. "I would like that, all of it. I would like that very much." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and Helena rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. They stood that way for a long time, wrapped in each other and in the promise of the future, while above them, the stars wheeled across the endless prairie sky. The courtship that followed was everything Helena had not known she wanted. Duncan was respectful of her position as his employee, never pushing beyond what was proper while Mrs. Garcia was watching, but finding private moments to talk, to walk together in the evenings, to share dreams and plans. He brought her small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry he thought she would enjoy, a beautiful shawl when the weather turned cold. He listened when she talked about her life before, about Jacob and the pain of losing him, about the hard years that followed, and he never tried to diminish or fix those feelings, just held space for them. Helena found herself opening up in ways she had not since Jacob's death, sharing not just the hard parts but the good parts too. Her dreams of having a real home, children perhaps, a life of purpose and meaning. And Duncan shared his own dreams, expanding the ranch, maybe raising horses in addition to cattle, building something that would last, that would matter. Their dreams began to weave together, separate threads becoming one fabric. Mrs. Garcia watched the courtship with obvious approval, taking every opportunity to leave them alone together while maintaining enough propriety to prevent scandal. The ranch hands accepted Helena's new status without comment, treating her with the respect due to the woman who would eventually be their boss's wife. Charlie Donovan, gruff and practical, went out of his way to tell Helena that Duncan was the happiest he had seen him in the 8 years they had worked together, and that she was good for him. Fall arrived, turning the prairie grasses golden and bringing crisp mornings that made Helena's flower gathering more challenging but no less rewarding. She had established regular spots around the ranch where different wildflowers grew, and she knew the seasons of each, when the asters would bloom and when the last roses would fade. The house was her domain now, and she ran it with Mrs. Garcia's help, managing not just the flowers but all the domestic operations. Duncan consulted her on decisions, asking her opinion on purchases and plans, treating her as a partner even before they were officially engaged. The investment from the Philadelphia gentleman transformed the ranch. Duncan bought better breeding stock, improved the buildings, and hired 2 more hands to help with the expanded operation. He purchased the adjoining property he had wanted, adding another 500 acres to the Triple H. The ranch prospered, and with prosperity came respect. Duncan was invited to join the Cattlemen's Association, and his opinions were sought by other ranchers. Helena was proud of him, proud to be part of his success. Winter came to the prairie with fierce winds and heavy snow that sometimes kept them all inside for days at a time. Helena loved those times when the house became a cozy refuge, and she could spend hours talking with Duncan by the fire or reading while he worked on his accounts. They played checkers and argued amiably about politics, and discovered that they shared a love of music, even though neither could play an instrument. Duncan taught her to play poker, and she proved to have an unexpected talent for bluffing that made him laugh. She taught him to bake bread, And though his first attempts were disasters, he kept trying until he could produce a respectable loaf. On Christmas Eve, a year and a half after Helena had first come to the ranch, Duncan gave her a ring. It was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious, but beautiful in its simplicity. He proposed formally, on one knee in front of the fireplace, with Mrs. Garcia and the ranch hands gathered as witnesses. "Helena Foster, you came into my life in a rainstorm, and you have been sunshine ever since. You have made my house a home, my work meaningful, and my heart full. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Through happy tears, Helena said yes, and Duncan slipped the ring onto her finger. Mrs. Garcia cried and hugged them both, and the ranch hands cheered, and someone produced a bottle of whiskey for toasts. It was perfect, exactly what Helena wanted, surrounded by people who had become family, committing to the man she loved. They married in the spring, on a day when the prairie was carpet with wildflowers. The ceremony was held at the small church in Red Cloud, with most of the town in attendance. Duncan wore a new suit that made him look handsome and slightly uncomfortable, and Helena wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Garcia had helped her sew. The Presbyterian minister performed the ceremony, and when Duncan kissed her as his wife, Helena felt a completeness she had not known was possible. The ranch hands had decorated the house for the reception, stringing paper decorations and arranging tables for the feast Mrs. Garcia had been preparing for days. The whole town seemed to be there, ranchers and shopkeepers and people Helena had known during her hardest times, all celebrating this new beginning. Mr. Pemberton had sent a generous gift and a letter congratulating Duncan on his good fortune. Helena danced with her new husband in the yard under the open sky, and thought about how far she had come from that rainy day when she sold flowers on a street corner. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Duncan patient with her nervousness, reminding her that they had all the time in the world. Helena had been married before, but this felt different, untainted by the worry and struggle that had marked her first marriage. This was joy, pure and simple, two people choosing each other and committing to build a life together. As spring turned to summer, Helena settled into married life with contentment that felt almost miraculous after the hardship of her widowhood. She and Mrs. Garcia continued to manage the house, though Helena now did it as mistress rather than employee. She expanded her flower gardens, planting cultivated varieties alongside the wildflowers, creating beauty that ranch visitors always commented on. She became known in the county for her skill with flowers, and other ranch wives began asking her advice on their own gardens. Duncan thrived too, growing more confident as the ranch prospered. The investment from the Philadelphia gentleman paid off better than anyone had hoped, and the Triple H became known as one of the best operations in Nebraska. Duncan's cattle won prizes at fairs, and his business acumen was respected throughout the territory. But he never forgot that it was Helena's help that had made it possible, that her eye for beauty and her determination had convinced those critical investors to take a chance on a frontier rancher. Their love deepened as they learned to navigate married life together, figuring out each other's rhythms and preferences, learning to disagree without rancor and to support each other through difficulties. Duncan learned that Helena needed time alone sometimes, particularly in the mornings when she gathered flowers, and that she thought better when she could work with her hands. Helena learned that Duncan worried more than he let on, that he needed reassurance even when he seemed most confident, and that physical affection was the way he best expressed love when words failed him. In the winter of their first year of marriage, Helena discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had always wanted children, but her pregnancy with Jacob had ended in miscarriage, and she was afraid to hope this time would be different. Duncan was ecstatic and immediately became overprotective, trying to prevent her from doing any work that might be strenuous. Helena had to remind him gently but firmly that she was pregnant, not ill, and that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. Mrs. Garcia, who had raised 5 children of her own, took Helena under her wing, sharing wisdom and reassurance. She taught Helena what to expect, how to prepare, what supplies would be needed. Charlie Donovan, awkward around the topic of pregnancy but wanting to help, built a beautiful cradle from oak wood and presented it to Helena with gruff embarrassment. The other hands followed his lead, each contributing something for the baby, knitted blankets or carved toys or promises to be gentle uncles. Helena's pregnancy was healthy, and as her body changed, so did her perspective. She found herself thinking about the future in new ways, about the child she would bring into this world and the life she and Duncan were building. She thought about her first husband sometimes, and the life they had dreamed of but never achieved, and while there was still sadness in those memories, there was also acceptance. Jacob would have wanted her to be happy, to find love again, to have the family they had wanted together. In early summer, when wildflowers covered the prairie in a riot of color, Helena went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Helena thought she might not survive it. But Mrs. Garcia was there, and the doctor from town that Duncan had insisted on having present, and most importantly, Duncan himself, holding her hand and refusing to leave even when the doctor suggested it might be better if he waited elsewhere. Their son was born at dawn, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at the transition. Duncan cried when he held him for the first time, this man who had seemed so stern when Helena first met him, tears streaming down his face as he cradled his tiny son. They named him Jacob Duncan Hayes, honoring both Helena's past and their present, and Duncan whispered to the baby all the dreams he had for him, all the ways he would teach him and love him and help him become a good man. Recovery was slow, and Helena spent weeks doing little but nursing her son and sleeping, but she had never felt more content. Duncan was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with Jacob, changing him and walking him when he fussed and talking to him as if he could understand every word. Mrs. Garcia doted on the baby with all the love of a grandmother, and the ranch hands took turns visiting to pay their respects to the newest member of the Triple H family. As Jacob grew from infant to toddler, Helena marveled at the life they had built. The ranch continued to prosper, and they added to it, building a larger barn and improving the breeding program. Helena's gardens flourished, and she started selling seeds and starts to other ranchers' wives, creating a small business of her own. Jacob was a bright, curious child who loved following his father around the ranch, and Duncan was patient with his endless questions and constant company. 3 years after Jacob was born, Helena had a daughter they named Caroline Rose, and 2 years after that, another son they named Samuel. The house rang with children's laughter, and Helena sometimes paused in her work to marvel at how much her life had changed. She thought about that rainy day when she sold flowers on a street corner, desperate and alone, and about Duncan buying them all and offering her a job. It seemed like another lifetime, like something that had happened to someone else. Duncan aged into his role as rancher and father with grace, his hair beginning to silver at the temples, his face gaining lines from years of squinting at the sun, but his eyes still lighting up when Helena entered a room. They had weathered challenges together, droughts and hard winters, the death of Mrs. Garcia from old age and the grief that followed, the normal struggles of raising children and running a ranch. But through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation on which everything else was built. On their 10th anniversary, Duncan took Helena back to Red Cloud, to the corner where they had first met. It was spring again, and rain was threatening, clouds heavy and dark over the prairie. They stood on the same spot where Helena had sold flowers so long ago, and Duncan pulled a bunch of wildflowers from inside his coat, slightly crushed but still beautiful. "I bought all your flowers that day," he said, "but what I really wanted was you. I just did not know how to say it." Helena took the flowers, tears in her eyes. "You gave me back my life. You gave me everything I thought I had lost." "No," Duncan said, pulling her close. "You gave me everything I did not know I needed. You turned a house into a home, a business into a legacy, a lonely man into a husband and father. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Helena Hayes." They kissed there on the street corner, heedless of who might see, and when the rain finally came, they walked back to the hotel laughing, holding hands like young lovers. That evening, as they sat by the window watching the storm, Helena thought about all the storms she had weathered in her life, the ones that had nearly broken her, and the ones that had brought unexpected blessings. And she was grateful for all of them, because they had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life that was more than she ever could have dreamed. The years continued to pass, bringing their joys and sorrows. Jacob grew into a serious young man who wanted to study law back east, but promised to return to Nebraska to practice. Caroline proved to have her mother's eye for beauty, and began developing new varieties of flowers through careful crossbreeding, creating hybrid wildflowers that became sought after throughout the territory. Samuel was like his father, happiest on horseback, already talking about expanding the ranch when he was old enough to take over. Duncan's hair went fully gray, and Helena's hands developed the same kind of calluses she had fought against as a young widow. But these were earned through work she loved rather than desperate necessity. They added a room to the house for Helena's flower business, and another for Duncan's growing library of agricultural texts. The Triple H became known throughout Nebraska and beyond, a model of successful ranching and careful stewardship of the land. On quiet evenings, when the children were in bed and the ranch was settling in for the night, Duncan and Helena would sit on the porch as they had so many times before, watching the sun set over the prairie. They did not always talk. Sometimes the silence was enough, the comfort of presence that long married couples develop. But sometimes they would reminisce, talking about that first rainy day, about the Philadelphia gentleman and the transformation of the house, about all the moments big and small that had brought them to this place. "You ever regret it?" Duncan asked once, on a particularly beautiful evening when the sky was painted in brilliant colors. "Giving up your independence to marry me?" Helena looked at him, at this man who had saved her when she was drowning and then loved her for exactly who she was, and smiled. "I did not give up my independence. I gained a partner. There is a difference." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her wedding ring in the absent gesture that had become habit over the years. "I am a lucky man." "We are both lucky," Helena corrected. "Lucky that it rained that day. Lucky that you saw me. Lucky that we were brave enough to take a chance on each other." As the stars began to appear, Helena thought about luck and choice and all the ways a life could turn on a single moment. If it had not rained that day, if Duncan had not ridden past, if she had not accepted his offer, her life would have been so different. She might have survived, might have found some other way to scrape by, but she would not have thrived. She would not have known the joy of being truly seen and valued. She would not have known the depths of love that could exist between two people who chose each other freely and completely. The children grew and eventually left, Jacob to his law practice in Omaha, where he specialized in land rights and water law, Caroline to marry a botanist from the university in Lincoln, and continue her hybridization work on a larger scale, Samuel to take over the ranch operations as Duncan gradually stepped back from the day-to-day management. Helena and Duncan became grandparents, delighted by each new addition to their growing family, enjoying the privilege of loving children without the full weight of responsibility. They aged together, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp, their love deepening into something richer and more complex than the early passion, though that too remained. They knew each other completely by then, every scar and story, every fear and hope. They had become one unit while still remaining two individuals, the kind of partnership that comes only from decades of choosing each other over and over again. On their 40th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Jacob came with his wife and 3 children, Caroline with her husband and 2 daughters, and Samuel with his wife and their 4 sons. The house was full of noise and laughter, and the chaos of multiple generations under one roof. A photographer came from Lincoln to take a family portrait, and they all gathered on the porch, Duncan and Helena at the center surrounded by the evidence of their love. Looking at that photograph later, Helena marveled at how much one moment could matter. That rainy day when Duncan bought her flowers had seemed like simple luck, a kind rancher helping a struggling widow. But it had been the beginning of everything, the first thread in a tapestry that had become their life together. All these children and grandchildren, this prosperous ranch, this legacy they had built, it all traced back to that single moment of connection. Duncan developed a cough the following winter that no amount of doctoring seemed to cure. By spring, it was clear he was seriously ill, the doctor's diagnosis of consumption casting a shadow over the ranch. Helena tended him with the same fierce determination she had shown standing in the rain selling flowers, refusing to give up hope even as Duncan grew weaker. The children came home, taking turns at his bedside, saying things that needed to be said while there was still time. On a morning when the prairie was covered in wildflowers, the same kind Helena had sold so long ago, Duncan asked to be taken outside to the porch. Samuel and Jacob carried him gently, and Helena sat beside him, holding his hand as they watched the sun rise over land they had built together. "Thank you," Duncan whispered, his voice weak but his eyes still clear, "for saying yes. For taking a chance on a rancher who did not know how to talk to a beautiful woman selling flowers in the rain." "Thank you for seeing me," Helena replied, tears streaming down her face. "For buying all the flowers, for giving me a reason to keep going. Love you," Duncan managed. "Always." "Forever." "Forever," Helena echoed and held his hand as his breathing slowly quieted and then stopped. His last sight, the prairie they both loved bathed in morning light. The grief was immense, but Helena had learned how to carry grief. She had done it before, and she did it again, this time surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, supported by the community she and Duncan had been part of for so many decades. She kept the ranch going with Samuel's help, refusing to abandon the legacy they had built together. She continued her flower work, finding solace in the simple act of making things beautiful, just as she had all those years ago. Helena lived another 15 years, long enough to see great-grandchildren born, to see the ranch prosper under Samuel's management, to see Jacob argue a case before the territorial Supreme Court and Caroline's hybrid flowers sold in seed catalogs across the country. She lived long enough to know that what she and Duncan had built would endure, that their love had created something that transcended their individual lives. When Helena finally passed, quietly in her sleep at the age of 83, She was buried next to Duncan on a hillside overlooking the ranch, surrounded by wildflowers that came back year after year. The gravestone was simple, just their names and dates, but underneath it read, "They built a life from flowers and faith." At the funeral, Jacob told the story of how his parents met, about the rainstorm and the flowers and the rancher who bought them all and offered his mother a job. It had become family legend, the story told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that love could come from the most unexpected places if you were brave enough to accept it. The Triple H Ranch continued for generations, each inheritor knowing the story of its founding, of the widow who sold flowers and the rancher who saw past her circumstances to the woman beneath. Helena's gardens flourished, maintained by descendants who inherited her eye for beauty, and Duncan's business principles guided the ranch through changing times. But more than the physical legacy, what endured was the proof that lives could be transformed, that desperation could become hope, that a chance encounter in the rain could become a love story that lasted beyond death and into memory. Years later, a great-great-granddaughter writing a family history would stand on that same street corner in Red Cloud, now paved and lined with modern buildings, and try to imagine what it had been like. She pictured a young widow standing in the rain, desperate and alone, and a rancher on horseback making a decision that would change both their lives. She thought about how many moments happen every day where lives could intersect and transform. How many chances are missed because people are not paying attention or are too afraid to act. And she was grateful that on that particular day, in that particular rainstorm, her great-great-grandparents had both been brave enough to take a chance. The story became more than family history. It became a kind of parable about hope and second chances, about seeing the worth in people when they were at their lowest, about building something lasting from the smallest beginning. It was told at weddings to remind couples that love required both feeling and choice, that the initial spark was just the beginning, and the real work came in choosing each other every day. It was told at funerals to remind mourners that endings were not really endings, that love persisted in the lives it touched and the legacy it created. And somewhere, in the eternal place where stories live independent of their tellers, Helena and Duncan walked together through fields of wildflowers under an endless prairie sky, forever young, forever in love, forever grateful for the rainstorm that brought them together and the courage they found to build a life from flowers and faith. The rain that had seemed like such a hardship became a blessing in retrospect, washing away the old life to make room for the new, bringing the rancher and the widow together at exactly the moment when they both needed each other most. The wildflowers continued to bloom every spring on the prairie, purple lupine and golden black-eyed Susans, delicate wild roses and bright red Indian paintbrush, a living reminder of the woman who loved them enough to gather them even in the rain, and the man who loved her enough to buy them all and offer her not just work, but a future. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings when the wind blew across the grassland, you might hear echoes of laughter from long ago, and the sound of two voices speaking words of love that time could never erase.